I'd always considered myself skeptical when it came to local legends, the kind of stories whispered in small neighborhoods to keep children from wandering too far or to give an air of mystery to otherwise ordinary places. But that night in São Paulo, standing at the mouth of an old tunnel, hidden between two crumbling brick walls and wrapped in the shadow of overgrown trees, I began to feel that maybe I had made a mistake in ignoring every warning I had received. "Don't go there after dark," one of the street vendors had told me earlier that afternoon, her eyes darting toward the alley that led to the tunnel. An elderly man at the bus stop had shaken his head slowly when I asked for directions, muttering something about those who go in don't always come back out the same. At first, I thought it was all just urban myth. After all, São Paulo is full of stories about haunted buildings, cursed corners, and strange disappearances. But this one felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself tightened when the subject came up. By the time the sun slipped behind the horizon and the streetlights began to hum to life, I had convinced myself that there was nothing in that tunnel that could scare me. My camera was charged, my flashlight ready, and my curiosity burning hotter than my common sense. As I approached the alley, I noticed that the usual life of the neighborhood, the chatter, the clinking of glasses from the nearby bar, the distant hum of motorcycles, seemed to fade away. The sound of my own footsteps on the uneven cobblestones grew unnervingly loud, echoing faintly off the narrowing walls. There was graffiti on every surface, some of it fresh and colorful, some faded to the point of illegibility. But one piece in particular made me stop, a crude, hastily scrawled warning in red paint that read, "Non ENTRE APÓS ou ESCURECER, don't enter after dark." I laughed under my breath, more to break the growing tension than because I actually found it funny. The tunnel's entrance was framed by ancient-looking stone, blackened in places as though it had been scorched. Inside, it was pure darkness, the kind that swallowed the weak glow of the street behind me the moment I stepped closer. I raised my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The walls were damp, glistening slightly, and narrow streaks of water dripped steadily from the ceiling, creating a faint but steady echo. Somewhere deep inside, I thought I heard movement, a soft shuffle, too rhythmic to be random. I told myself it was probably a rat, maybe a stray cat, but there was something about the sound that felt deliberate. I checked my phone. No signal, not even a flicker of reception. That's when I realized I hadn't heard a single voice, car, or sound from outside for several minutes. The silence pressed against my ears, and for the first time, I hesitated. My mind flashed back to the old man's words, the street vendor's anxious glance, and the fact that not a single person I had asked for directions had been willing to come this way. Still, I stepped forward, telling myself that if I turned back now, I'd never forgive my own cowardice. The air inside was cold, colder than it should have been for a summer night in São Paulo, and with every step I felt as if I were descending deeper into another world entirely, one where the city above no longer existed. I didn't know it yet, but this was the point of no return, because once you cross a certain distance in that tunnel, you're not just walking through stone and shadow anymore. Something else begins to walk with you. The deeper I went, the more the tunnel seemed to stretch in ways that didn't make sense, as though it were longer than the space it could possibly occupy beneath the city. My flashlight beam jittered slightly in my hand, not because it was failing, but because I had started to notice something that made my grip tighten. The walls weren't just stone, they were carved. Not the kind of graffiti I'd seen at the entrance, but older, deeper grooves etched directly into the rock. Patterns that curled and spiraled in shapes I couldn't recognize, some of them worn nearly smooth by time, others still sharp to the touch. As I ran my fingers over one, I felt a faint vibration, almost like a hum, but it was so subtle I could almost convince myself it was my imagination. The shuffling sound I had heard earlier came again, closer this time, but when I swung the flashlight toward it, there was nothing there, just the endless black swallowing my light. I moved on, counting my steps, trying to ground myself in something measurable. 28, 35, 42. Then I froze. The dripping sound had stopped entirely. It shouldn't have. There had been a constant trickle from the ceiling since I entered. The silence now was so total that I could hear the faint thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, cutting through that silence, came a single, sharp sound. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed oddly, not from behind me, not from ahead, but from somewhere within the walls themselves. I whipped my head around, scanning both sides of the tunnel. That's when my flashlight caught something up high on the left wall, an opening, just big enough for a person to crawl through. I don't know why I even considered it, but there was something about that dark square that drew me in, as though it were waiting. I stepped closer and saw that the inside wasn't lined with stone at all, but with what looked like warped, aged wood, blackened by moisture. I leaned in, listening, and I could swear I heard whispering. Not words exactly, but the cadence of speech, low, murmuring, and impossible to place in the tunnel's echo. My breath fogged slightly in front of me now, as if I had stepped into an air pocket, much colder than the rest of the passage. I pulled back quickly and continued forward, my footsteps unnervingly loud. The tunnel curved to the right, and for a moment, relief washed over me at the sight of what looked like a faint glow far ahead. Maybe an exit, maybe just a streetlight leaking in from the other side. But as I approached, I realized the glow wasn't steady. It flickered like candlelight, and it was accompanied by something else, the faint scent of burning wax. My pace slowed. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but curiosity, stubborn and dangerous, kept me moving. When I reached the bend, I stopped dead. In the distance, maybe 20 meters ahead, there was a cluster of candles arranged on the ground in a rough circle. And in the center of that circle, a figure crouched with its back to me. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs bent at unnatural angles, as if its joints weren't fixed where they should be. The flickering light cast its shadow against the far wall, and the shadow didn't match. The figure was still, but its shadow moved, twitching in jagged, insect-like motions. My throat went dry, and without meaning to, I took a single step backward. The crunch of gravel under my boot was deafening in the silence. The figure froze. Slowly, unnervingly slowly, its head began to turn, not in the limited arc a human neck allows, but in a smooth, almost mechanical rotation that kept going until I could see half its face in profile. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and then, in a voice that was both far away and impossibly close, it whispered a single word: "Stay." I don't know what part of me believed the command, but for a heartbeat I obeyed, rooted to the damp floor, while the word vibrated along the tunnel like a struck wire. "Stay," it had said, and the syllables stretched, thinning into the dripless silence until it felt like I was inside the word rather than merely hearing it. Then something older than obedience, something closer to survival, surged up and broke the spell. I stepped back again, careful heel testing loose gravel, trying not to make a sound. But the tunnel cared nothing for my caution. A pebble pinged away and skittered, and the figure's head finished its full, sickening rotation. I saw its face. No, not its face exactly, but an arrangement that suggested one, a plane too flat, skin that looked like damp paper laid over bone, features lightly pressed into place rather than grown there. The eyes were the worst. They were not truly eyes, but areas where the candlelight refused to settle, two distortions that drank color and returned nothing. The circle of candles guttered as if an invisible breath moved through them. The thing unfolded from its crouch, joints cracking like branches twisted in winter, and rose to a height I'd misjudged. It scraped the tunnel ceiling and left something on the stone, an ashy smear, like soot that bled. I raised my flashlight, hands shaking, and the beam seemed to slow as it crossed the air, dragging as though whatever lived between me and it was thicker than before. The light hit the candles, flared on their melted rims, and landed on the figure's shoulder where fabric should have been. There was no fabric. There was a memory of fabric. The surface rippled as if catching up with itself, then stilled into something like a black coat that didn't quite touch the body it pretended to cover. "I'm leaving," I said, and my voice broke in the middle, the sound swallowed so quickly that I wasn't entirely sure I'd spoken at all. The figure tilted, interested. "Stay," it repeated, and behind the word, a second voice arrived late, like an echo with a different mouth, whispering the same command in Portuguese, "Fica." I flicked the flashlight to the side wall and found those carved spirals again, deeper here, packed close together until they formed an unbroken braid of symbols. Between them, some person, had scratched messages with a knife or a key. Names, dates, prayers, apologies, and one phrase carved again and again and again until the letters ran into one another. "Now responda. Do not respond." I stepped left, and the thing stepped with me, not walking so much as shifting, like the space it occupied moved under it. The circle of candles hissed as wax overflowed onto cold stone. I felt heat on my shins, while the air at my face remained cold enough to sting the inside of my nose. "Why?" I asked. The wrong question. The kind you only ever ask when you're too far in. The figure leaned forward, neck folding like a wrong hinge, and the shadow that wasn't its shadow leaned another way altogether, long fingers splaying across the wall where my own beam had fallen. They touched the carvings. The hum I'd felt earlier climbed out of the stone into my bones, high and almost musical, and for a second it braided with the blood thudding in my ears. "You came because you were asked," the far-near voice said, and then, on delay, "Chamado." I shook my head so hard the flashlight smeared a white wound across the dark. "No one asked me to," but even as the sentence left my mouth, memory snagged me. The old man's warning at the bus stop, the vendor's darted glance, the alley itself tilted as if pointing, the red paint words, "Don't enter after dark," feeling more like a dare than a prohibition when I first read them. How many times had I followed the shape of a boundary just to see what lived on the other side? "I'm leaving," I said again, firmer, and took another step back. The tunnel behind me felt narrower than it had minutes before, the black pressed close, and I understood with a cold, creeping certainty that distance here did not obey my feet. If I turned and ran, I might run in place. If I screamed, I might only hear my voice across another bend, arriving late, too late. The candles guttered lower, as though time was behaving normally for them and not for me, and the figure's not shadow crawled higher across the stone, reaching a small wooden crucifix someone had wedged in a crack. The wood trembled as if remembering wind, and then went still. "Why this tunnel?" I asked, trying to anchor the moment in speech, to bind myself to the logic of cause and effect like a prayer. The figure shifted, and the twin voices, one right away, one delayed, said, "Because it keeps what is carried." I didn't understand until it gestured, or something like a gesture, and I saw beyond the candle circle that the floor wasn't only stone, it was riverbed gravel laid bare, as if water had run here long ago and left its bones arranged in careful curves. The feeling returned, the sense of extra space folded into the tunnel, like an old stream's memory tucked beneath the city. "Aquifer," I whispered, dredging the word from some documentary I'd half-watched, and the delayed voice softly returned it to me, "Aquifero," as if tasting it, as if the language itself was more interesting than the fact. The figure leaned, and with that leaning, the tunnel dipped around me, a slow, stomach-turning roll of perspective. My phone buzzed in my pocket so violently I thought it might crack. I jerked it out with one hand, thumbed the screen, saw nothing but static grain crawling over the lock screen photo. Then, for a heartbeat, an image resolved. A corridor of light that was not this tunnel, washed in sun, a tiled wall, a woman walking away with her hair in a red scarf, the camera not quite level. The photo snapped back to static, then to the normal lock screen time, 03.13, and the battery suddenly at 1%, despite having been full an hour before. I looked up, and the figure was closer, and yet still 20 meters away, and my mind stuttered over the contradiction before discarding the need to solve it. "You should not be here," the first voice said, and the echoing second admitted a more intimate truth. "Você já está. You already are." The candles coughed and one died, then another, the circle thinning. Shadows multiplied in ways that did not line up with what remained lit. Every instinct screamed to break the circle, to kick the candles aside, to make chaos. But my eyes caught a detail at the edge of the arrangement. Small offerings, coins gone green with corrosion, a rosary collapsed into an oval of black beads, a lighter, a folded paper that had once been white and was now grey as lungs. I edged closer to the wall rather than toward the candles, keeping the carvings to my shoulder as if they would somehow favor me. And in that instant, something brushed my other shoulder, the tunnel side where there was only air. It felt like the delicate pressure of 3 fingertips touching through cloth. I spun, set the flashlight high, and the beam met no form, only a quivering in the air like heat mirage. The touch withdrew, and I heard a child breathing right over my ear, the quiet, effortful breath of someone trying hard not to cry. "Who's there?" I asked, and regretted it as soon as I gave the tunnel another hook to hang a voice on. The answer did not come from where the breath had been. It came from the floor, from the pattern of gravel itself. A whisper that sounded like it was made of many tiny stones shifting at once said, "We are." The figure straightened at that, as if displeased to be preempted, and the knot shadow snapped into stillness like a cut wire. The hum in the wall deepened, and the carvings seemed to flex as though they were muscles under stone skin. "Enough," the first voice said, a flat decree. And then, late as ever, the second voice delivered a different line altogether, more dangerous for its gentleness. "Mostra. Show." The circle of candles flamed up in a synchronized pulse and went rigidly still, their flames no longer dancing but fixed, as if the air had been pinned. The figure stepped backward or forward, I couldn't tell. The perspective collapsed and reassembled so fast that my stomach lurched, and a new space appeared where the candles had been, a square of black without texture, not an absence, but a door to a deeper absence. From inside, it came the sound I'd been hearing since I entered, made huge now. Tap, tap, tap. Not random, not animal. Counting. 3 beats, then silence, then 3 again, then silence. Patient as time. I realized with a small, treacherous bloom of relief that I knew the pattern. It was the pace of a human knocking, not with urgency, not in panic, but in the steady rhythm of someone asking to be let out. The moment I recognized that rhythm, something in me shifted from fear to a sharper, colder sensation, awareness. Whoever, whatever, was behind that black square wasn't just existing there, it was waiting, and the knocks weren't mindless. They were deliberate, measured, like a message for anyone foolish enough to stand where I stood. I gripped the flashlight tighter, but even its beam seemed hesitant to cross that boundary, the light bending strangely at the edges of the void, as if the darkness inside was thicker than the air around it. My mind tried to place it in something rational, a sealed maintenance shaft, maybe, or an old storage alcove, but every instinct screamed that no amount of brick and mortar could hold that kind of black. The figure stood just outside the edge of the opening, as though guarding it, the knot shadow now perfectly still and pressed flat against the wall like a stain that had always been there. "You hear it," the first voice said, the sound curling into my ear with unnatural intimacy. The second voice arrived late, gentler but no less sinister. "Agora, você sabe. Now you know." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak, to anchor my thoughts in words. "Who is knocking?" The figure didn't move, but from within the black square came the faintest creak, like someone shifting their weight on old wood, followed by another set of knocks. 3, pause 3, exactly the same as before. It was an answer without being one, a confirmation wrapped in refusal. The carvings along the wall beside me seemed to hum louder, and this time it wasn't just under my skin. I could feel it in my teeth, a faint vibration that made me clench my jaw. My phone buzzed again, this time without light, without screen, just the sensation in my pocket, like a phantom notification. I pulled it out, and it was dead, black screen, but still warm in my palm, as if it had just been used. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, almost unplaceable at first, but growing stronger. Wet earth, rust, and something sweet, like decaying fruit. It leaked from the opening, curling around my ankles, and with it came a draft that was impossibly cold. I took a step back, but the tunnel behind me now felt different. The air denser, the silence fuller, like the space itself was resisting my retreat. "It's been knocking a long time," the first voice murmured, almost conversational. The second voice, later, softer, said, "Desde antes de nos," since before us. My throat tightened. "Why don't you let it out?" I asked, and this time both voices answered at once, overlapping in a way that made my vision blur. "Because it remembers." The candles flared again, all at once, and for the first time I saw past the figure's shoulder into the black square. Not far inside, maybe a meter, stood another figure, identical in height and shape to the one before me, but completely still, its surface dull like wet ash, its eyes closed as if in sleep. My breath caught, the first figure shifted, blocking the view, and the black square seemed to deepen again, folding in on itself until it was once more nothing but impenetrable dark. The tapping stopped. In its place came a sound so quiet I almost missed it, a faint dragging inhale, like someone waking from a long, long sleep. I stepped back again, my heel brushing the wall carvings, and the hum surged so loud inside my head that I bit down to stop my teeth from chattering. "You should go now," the first voice said, and the second followed with a tone I hadn't heard from it before, almost protective. "Vai, go." My mind screamed to listen, to turn, to run, but my body froze, because in that moment I felt a breath, warm this time, impossibly warm, brush the back of my neck, and the knocking began again from behind me. That breath was wrong in every way, too close, too steady, and too aware. I spun around so fast, my shoulder slammed into the damp stone wall, sending a dull ache through my arm, but the beam of my flashlight only found the empty stretch of tunnel I'd walked through minutes before. Empty, but not. The air there had weight, a subtle distortion like heat rising off asphalt, except this was cold, colder than the draft from the black square, and it moved toward me with the slow certainty of something that didn't need to hurry. The knocking behind me continued, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, now perfectly in sync with the ones I swore I could still hear ahead. My chest tightened. 2 sets, 2 sources. My mind scrambled for logic, echo, reverberation, tricks of sound in a long enclosed space, but the rhythm wasn't bouncing off stone. It was answering itself like a conversation between things that weren't meant to speak to each other in the presence of the living. I turned back toward the black square, but the figure that had been guarding it was gone. The candles were still there, flames unnervingly rigid, but the space beyond them was empty. My stomach dropped. The knot shadow was gone too. I took a step toward the candles, thinking maybe I could just step through the circle and see what lay beyond. But the moment my boot brushed the edge of wax, the flames tilted toward me, every single one, as if leaning in to listen. The knocks behind me stopped. The silence was worse. And then, from somewhere deep in the tunnel's dark belly, a voice unlike the 2 I'd heard before spoke, low, ragged, and full of the kind of hunger that doesn't belong to any human throat. "Turn around." It was not a suggestion. My hands trembled so hard, the beam of my flashlight shook like a heartbeat against the tunnel walls. Every instinct told me not to obey, that whatever waited behind me had learned the shape of command from the thing in the black square. I gritted my teeth, refused, and kept my eyes locked on the rigid flames. That's when I saw it. Between the candle circle and the square of black, the stone floor rippled, as if the rock itself were shifting under a thin layer of water. The hum in the carvings became almost deafening, each vibration climbing higher until it was no longer a sound but a pressure against my skull. Something was pushing up from beneath the stone. The candle flames elongated, stretching thin like strings pulled taut, and the scent of wet earth flooded my nose. My vision blurred at the edges, but I forced myself to focus on the movement below. Slowly, the rippling stopped, and in its place, a line of small, pale shapes emerged from cracks in the floor. At first I thought they were stones, smoothed by time. Then one rolled slightly, revealing empty sockets where eyes should have been. Skull, tiny ones, dozens of them. My stomach lurched, bile rising, but I couldn't look away. They weren't lying still. They were turning, angling toward me as if listening. Somewhere behind me, that low, ragged voice said again, softer but more insistent, "Turn, around." I felt something touch my back. Not fingers, not a hand, but the flat, deliberate press of a face leaning close enough for skin to almost meet skin. And then, in a whisper so faint it might have been inside my head, it asked, "Do you know my name?" The question slithered into my mind like smoke, bypassing my ears entirely. And for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it, until the cold behind me deepened, and the unseen presence pressed closer, waiting for an answer. "No," I whispered before I could stop myself, and instantly regretted it. The carvings on the wall to my right pulsed with a sudden heat, as if the stone itself had taken offense. Somewhere ahead, the black square seemed to swell, its edges fraying into the tunnel like tendrils of night reaching for me. The candle flames snapped upright again, perfectly still, their light sharpening in an unnatural way that made every shadow too crisp, as if the air had turned to glass. The presence behind me drew back just enough for the temperature to rise by a fraction, but it didn't leave. "Then I will tell you," the voice rasped, though I could feel each syllable scrape through my bones rather than simply hear it. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied, and in that brief stutter of light I caught movement in the black square, something shifting in the depthless dark, slow and deliberate, like a body unfolding after being trapped in too small a space. I kept my eyes on the candles, afraid that looking too directly would mean seeing more than I could survive, but the movement was impossible to ignore. A shape emerged just far enough into the glow for me to make out its texture. Not skin, not cloth, but something in between, pitted and rough, like stone worn by water, yet still pulsing faintly as if alive. "They called me the Keeper," the voice said, and in the delayed echo, the second voice from before murmured its translation, "O Guardião." The name didn't feel like a title. It felt like a sentence. My mind clawed for questions, for anything that could break the thread pulling me toward that square, but every thought dissolved in the oppressive hum vibrating through the tunnel. Then the knocking resumed, but it wasn't in threes anymore. This was faster, more frantic, as if something or someone was pounding to get out before the Keeper finished speaking. The air between the candles and the black square shimmered, and I realized with a lurch that the space inside was no longer empty. The still, ash-colored figure I'd glimpsed earlier had stepped forward, and now I could see its face, or what should have been a face. There were no features at all, only the suggestion of them, like shapes pressing against a thin curtain from the other side. My pulse pounded so loud I almost missed the next words. "When it learns your name, it follows you home." The second voice didn't translate this time. I didn't need it to. The hum from the carvings became unbearable, forcing me to take a step back, but the moment my boots scraped against the stone, every candle flame bent toward me again, as though the tunnel itself was leaning in to watch. My grip on the flashlight tightened until my knuckles ached, and I realized the only thing keeping me from turning and running was the knowledge that there was something waiting behind me. And it already knew I didn't know its name. I could feel it behind me again, closer than before, close enough that the heat of my own breath bounced back against my neck. My mind raced, trying to decide whether knowing the name it wanted would save me or damn me, but the Keeper's earlier words echoed in my skull. "When it learns your name, it follows you home." If that was true, then what happened when you learned its name? My tongue felt thick, my throat dry, but I forced out, "What are you?" The voice behind me chuckled, a brittle, papery sound like leaves crumbling between fingers. It didn't answer directly. Instead, the candles in front of me wavered, their rigid flames bending away from the black square this time, as if repelled by what was coming forward. The figure inside stepped into the circle's edge, the featureless face tilting like it was scenting the air. The keeper's voice rose again, both in my ears and in the marrow of my bones. It was buried here before the city, before the roads, before the stones you stand on. We built the tunnel around it, not to use it, but to keep it still. The second voice followed, quieter, almost mournful, mas nunca dormiu, but it never slept. The pounding in the black square became a frantic scraping, like nails or claws raking at stone from inside. My heart hammered, adrenaline urging me to bolt, but I knew if I turned my back, I'd never see the exit again. I glanced toward the carvings for any hint of escape, and that's when I noticed one spiral was incomplete, broken, like something had scratched through it in anger. The hum was weaker there, as if the interruption in the design had bled out some of its strength. My instincts screamed that this was my chance. If the carvings were meant to contain whatever haunted this tunnel, maybe breaking their perfection further could open a way out. But the presence behind me shifted, sensing my thought, and its whisper slid into my ear so softly I almost mistook it for my own inner voice. If you break it, it comes with you. My fingers twitched toward the broken spiral anyway. The keeper's shadow, its not shadow, stretched across the wall, reaching toward me, and for the first time it spoke on its own, separate from the body casting it. The voice was a dry hiss, but clear. Choose. The scraping stopped. Silence slammed into the tunnel, thick and suffocating, and every flame in the circle burned straight up in unnatural stillness. In that silence, I felt the breath behind me draw in deep, slow and full, as if preparing to speak my name. The inhale behind me was so long and deliberate that I could feel each second stretch, a slow coil of dread winding around my spine. I clenched my jaw and stepped sideways toward the broken spiral, my back scraping the cold, damp wall. The keeper's head followed my movement, the featureless figure in the black square, leaning just enough that the flat suggestion of its face caught the candlelight, revealing the faint impression of a mouth, closed, but twitching at the corners like it was about to smile. The breath at my neck exhaled now, warm and sticky, carrying with it the faint smell of soil and something sweetly rotting. My stomach twisted, but I didn't stop. "If you speak my name," I said aloud, voice shaking but louder than I expected, "you'll never leave this tunnel either." It wasn't a threat I understood. It just came out, instinctive, like throwing a rock at an approaching animal. For a moment, the air behind me went still, as if the presence was taken aback. Then, softly, almost tenderly, it whispered, "I already have." My blood turned to ice. I didn't hear the name, but I felt it, like a pulse under my skin, as if the syllables had been planted in me. The carvings on the wall vibrated harder now, the hum becoming a deep, rhythmic throb that matched my heartbeat. The broken spiral seemed to shiver in the light, almost urging me to finish breaking it. I raised the flashlight in my right hand, gripping it like a club, and swung it hard at the carved line. Stones splintered under the blow, and a sharp, ringing crack shot through the tunnel. Instantly, the air changed, warmer, moving, carrying with it distant noise, faint but real, the sound of traffic, footsteps, the living city above. I'd opened something, but I'd opened it both ways. The keeper's not shadow whipped across the wall like a living stain, streaking toward the break I'd made, and from behind me, the presence lunged. I felt it pass through me, not around, not against, but through. A rush of cold and heat at once, stealing the breath from my lungs. My knees buckled, and the flashlight clattered to the floor, beams spinning wildly across the tunnel walls. In the chaos, I saw the candles blow out all at once, plunging the space into darkness, except for the narrow line of light spilling through the broken carving. Somewhere deep in that black, the frantic pounding returned, no longer trapped behind the square, but moving fast, coming from every direction at once. And then, close enough that the words brushed the inside of my ear, the keeper's voice said, "Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I lunged toward the sliver of light seeping through the broken spiral, every muscle screaming to move faster. The air in the tunnel thickened like syrup, each step feeling heavier, as if the space itself was trying to hold me back. Behind me, the pounding grew louder, not in one place but everywhere, above, below, inside the walls, like hundreds of fists were hammering at the stone. I could hear the dragging breath too, closing in, matching my pace no matter how fast I tried to go. My hands hit the wall at the gap, fingers scraping raw against the jagged stone. The opening was narrow, barely enough to wedge a shoulder through, but the warmth beyond it called to me like a lifeline. I shoved my arm through, then my head, feeling the air change. Less stale, more alive. But just as my torso passed through, something wrapped around my ankle. It wasn't a hand or a claw, but a grip made of pure pressure, like the air had solidified around me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I kicked wildly, the stone edge tearing into my skin. That's when the keeper appeared on the other side of the break, impossibly close, its head tilting in that slow, unnatural arc. For a second I thought it might help me, that maybe breaking the spiral had given it the same desire to leave. But then its knot shadow slid through the crack and coiled around my trapped leg like a length of black rope. The hum from the carvings rose to a painful pitch, and my vision began to blur. I could feel something trying to pull me backward, not just my body but deeper, like my thoughts were being reeled in too. Summoning every shred of panic-fueled strength, I twisted hard, bracing my free foot against the wall and wrenched my leg forward. The knot shadow tore away, but not before something cold and heavy seemed to sink into my skin. I tumbled through the gap, landing hard on the other side, my palms scraping against asphalt. I was outside. Night air rushed around me, warm and alive, with the distant hum of the city. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, but when I turned to look back, the break in the wall was gone. Just solid stone, unmarked, as if the spiral had never been touched. And then I realized the pounding hadn't stopped. It was faint now, but steady, and it wasn't coming from the tunnel anymore. It was coming from inside me. I stumbled backward from the wall, clutching my chest as if I could press the sound down, as if I could muffle the steady thud that no longer belonged to my heartbeat. It was slower, heavier. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Echoing inside my ribcage like someone knocking from the wrong side of a door. The street around me was empty. Too empty for a city like São Paulo at night. No cars, no footsteps, just the flicker of a lone street lamp and the faint metallic taste of the air. My breathing came fast, but each inhale seemed to carry a weight, like the air itself was thickening in my lungs. I turned in place, desperate for any sign of life. But the alley was unfamiliar now, the walls too tall, the angles wrong, as though I'd stepped out somewhere that wore the city like a disguise. My phone, somehow back in my pocket, buzzed once. I yanked it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up, not with my lock screen, but with a black background and a single line of text. "We know your name." I dropped it, the device clattering against the pavement, but the words burned in my mind as if I'd read them in my own handwriting. The pounding inside me grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just sound. It was a call, a rhythm that wanted to be answered. My mouth went dry, but I felt it forming the first syllable of something I'd never heard before, as if the name had been planted deep within me during those moments in the tunnel. I clamped my jaw shut, forcing it back, but in the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At the far end of the alley, just beyond the reach of the street lamp, stood the figure from the tunnel, the keeper. Its knot shadow stretched along the wall toward me, impossibly long, curling like a finger beckoning me forward. Behind it, for a fraction of a second, the black square shimmered into existence, pulsing faintly like an open wound in the world. And then it was gone, leaving only the figure, still and patient, waiting. My body trembled, every instinct torn between running and the terrible urge to walk toward it. The pounding in my chest quickened, syncing with my pulse until the two were indistinguishable. I knew then, with a cold certainty that rooted me in place, that the tunnel hadn't let me go at all. It had only moved the door, and somewhere deep inside, something else was now knocking back.